Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please welcome back to the stage Meg Szabo, Senior Editor for Bloomberg Green and Sustainability Events.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed lunch, that you actually enjoyed some of our different networking opportunities during the lunch and got a little break for our last couple of hours of programming. So welcome back. I just wanted to remind everybody we are doing questions. I know there's been a couple of sessions where it hasn't happened, but continue to submit them. We definitely want to do it for our next Climate Quitters session that's coming up in a couple of sessions. So please keep them coming. And also remember to just continue to engage with us on social media using the hashtag #BloombergGreen. Prince William and the Royal Foundation launched the Earthshot Prize in October of 2020, creating a solutions-driven global environmental prize. Bloomberg Philanthropies is proud to be a Global Alliance founding partner of the Earthshot Prize to help incentivize change and repair the planet over the next 10 years. Today, we are thrilled to have one of the 2022 finalists here to talk about how her company's technology is using bacteria to recycle carbon pollution into profitable and sustainable solutions. I can't wait to hear how she does that, by the way. But first, let's take a quick look at some of the highlights from the Earthshot Prize.
This is the Earthshot Prize.
There is no challenge bigger than the battle against climate change.
Earthshot finalist for 2022. Great to have you on board. You're doing fantastic work, and I'm really looking forward to Boston.
The Prince of Wales has awarded his Earthshot Prize.
The prize money, £1 million each, to take their projects further.
This is the greatest crisis that we are facing in our lifetime.
These people work tirelessly.
I have a lot of faith in the next generation. They say the children are our future. I believe it.
Welcome to Boston and the Earthshot Prize.
And the first Earthshot of 2022 goes to 4401.
Mercury Easter.
Nopla.
Goes to KT.
Queensland Indigenous Lands.
It's my hope the Earthshot legacy will continue to grow, which is why we must choose the path of hope, optimism, and urgency to repair our planet.
Please welcome to the stage Dr. Jennifer Holmgren, CEO of LanzaTech.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here, but most importantly, thanks to all of you for caring so much about the climate, because I know that's the only reason that you're all here. Let me tell you a little bit about LanzaTech, but before I do, I think we all need to remember why we're here, right? I don't think any of us needed to read the IPCC report to really understand the situation. And if you did read it, like I did, you cried, because you can see that 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees are really just a dream at this point. The reality is we're at 1.1 degree right now, and yet Pakistan, 30% was underwater last year. We reached temperatures in India that were just a few percent humidity away from a wet bulb temperature that could have killed entire cities. And of course, California is literally washing into the ocean. This has to change, and what we do at LanzaTech is we take this problem, this carbon pollution, and we convert it to the products that we use every single day. And the way we do this is with a bacteria. We turn to the bacteria that at LanzaTech we call our great-great-great-grandfather. This was a bacteria that lived on Earth openly when there was no air to breathe that was rich in oxygen, when we could not live here, when the planet was filled with toxic gases, this bacteria thrived. In fact, today it's rhesus, and you can still find it, but it's hiding in hydrothermal vents or other places where it hides from the beautiful air and atmosphere that we've created for ourselves. But we figure if we're going to repair, then we need to go back and use things that used to thrive in that atmosphere so that we could take all manner of pollution from industrial gases, waste, to solid waste like trash that ends up in our ocean, and we could convert that to all the products we use every day. This is not science fiction. That Zara dress was a collection that was sold at Christmas ago, and you could easily buy it on the internet. And the polyester in that dress was pollution from China, from one of our plants. It was gonna go into the atmosphere. Here are the pictures of the plants. These are 3 commercially operating plants. The first one started up in 2018. It makes 50,000 tons of ethanol, starting from a carbon monoxide gas that was going to be turned into carbon dioxide and particulates. Let's never forget that when we burn carbon, we don't just make carbon dioxide, we also make particulates that make it difficult to breathe that air. And that plant's been running since 2018. We've built 2 more. One is running at a ferroalloy mill, started in 2021, and the other one started in 2022, also at a ferroalloy mill in China. Our first plant in India has just started up. It uses a gas from a refinery, not a steel or ferroalloy plant. It uses hydrogen, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide. 50% of the carbon comes from carbon dioxide. In addition, we are starting another plant in China and a plant in Europe with ArcelorMittal, the largest steel company in the West. So we will have an additional 3 by the end of the year, not science fiction. This is truly industrial biotechnology. These are not bacteria that are lab prima donnas. These are actually bacteria that can live in the toxic environments of a steel mill gas. And essentially what we do, we plug a brewery. This is just like making beer, except you use gases instead of sugar, and we plug that into an industrial facility. It looks a lot like a refining unit operation because that's exactly what it is. It is a process technology that refines carbon waste to ethanol. How does it work? We have developed this bacteria. We've optimized this bacteria, and we've developed the whole process around it. This bacteria eats these gases in a special bioreactor that's continuous. So you know when you do fermentation, like in making beer, you put the yeast and the sugar and you go away, come back 3 months later. This is not like that. This actually is continuous. Gas in, product out. And we've optimized the whole process because we don't just care about carbon, we care about water. So we recycle our water, etc., to make the cost sensible. Where do these gases come from? Industrial gases. We can also take waste, solid waste, and gasify it, turn it into a gas, a partial combustion, and we can feed that into the reactor, makes the same product. And as hydrogen, green hydrogen becomes available, we can convert CO2. I always tell people, if you give me green hydrogen, I can refine carbon dioxide and make every product you will ever need. So what are we doing with that ethanol? If we can use all these waste resources, that's way more ethanol than the world needs, especially as we transition away from using ethanol as a blend component for gasoline. But we take that ethanol and we make jet fuel. We take that ethanol and we convert it to polyester. We've converted it to detergents. And of course, we can put it all back in the cycle because we can use all of these gases. This is basically the circular economy at work. These are all the types of products we've made. All of these things have started life at a gas that was going to be pollution and have been converted into these products. It is not science fiction. These products are real. We've made them at commercial scale. And just so we don't miss the point, this is actually part of the Move collection from H&M. And as you can tell, the polyester was made with our ethanol. This was sold on their internet site just a few weeks ago. So we're really excited to be able to do this. I told you we had done sustainable aviation fuel as well. In this case, we had to develop the technology to make sustainable aviation fuel, and we did that with Pacific Northwest National Lab. When we did that, the world uses 100 billion gallons of aviation fuel. Today, there's about 20 million being produced commercially. The gap is massive. Corsia says we have to get to 10 billion by the end of this decade, 7 years from now. Not a lot of time. And so what we decided to do is, instead of holding it tight inside LanzaTech, that we would actually spin out a company and capitalize it separately so we can build a 10 million gallon a year plant and get it up and running faster. That plant will be up and running later this year. And so I always say, if you love something, let it go. And we did. And so it's on its own and it's working well. We have gone after massive markets. These are combined about $1 trillion markets. And the reason that matters is because we want to go after the low-value commodity chemicals. Most people that do fermentation want to go after high value, but we want to stop gigatons of carbon from going in the atmosphere. And you don't do gigatons of carbon unless you start to displace our current carbon economy. So if you stop and think about it for a second, 30% of a barrel of petroleum ends up in the stuff we use every day. I know everybody thinks about fuel and power, but 30% is used to make the chair you sit on and the shoes you wear. And ethylene is the largest chemical of that. And so what we've done is we've gone ahead and gone after ethylene. If you make ethanol, you can make ethylene, the largest commodity chemical. And what we've also done is we've learned how to make ethylene from the gases directly, so we don't have to stop at ethanol. Now, this is still science fiction. We've done it in the lab, but we intend to commercialize it very soon. Our ethanol microbe naturally evolved, but we're making other important chemicals through not direct evolution, by genetic modification. And these are, again, massive commodity chemicals. We work at the interface of biology and engineering. Everything is programmed and modeled all the way to scale. We're building plants all over the world. Pollution is everywhere. We want to be everywhere. Think of us as the Roy Kent. He's there, he's here, he's there, he's blipping everywhere. And I would also, can I take a few more seconds? I also want to point out it took us 18 years to get to this point. As you know, when you go from discovery to first commercial process facilities, it's a long journey. We call it crossing the valley of death. And after you build your first one, you have to diffuse like solar did, so you are truly everywhere. And that is the Grand Canyon of death. And what we've done is we've partnered with Brookfield, who's committed up to $1 billion to help us build facilities faster. So we're really excited about creating this circular economy. I leave you with a simple thought. I leave you where we started. We have a massive problem. We have to reduce our carbon by 50%. That means we have to change our entire carbon economy. We are not going to incrementalize ourselves out of this. I just showed you we can do it. There are others who can do it. I welcome you to the revolution. Let's create that carbon economy of the future. Thank you.
Luma Hidalgo está ubicado en la Sierra Sur. El 80% de sus ciudadanos se dedican al cultivo del café. Y desafortunadamente, si no hacemos algo por preservar estos bosques, no habrá café. En 10 años no habrá café.
En este proyecto de Progressive Planet Coalition son 8 años que trabajaremos en coordinación y en alianza con productores.
Cuando siembro un árbol, son mi herencia para las futuras generaciones.
Please welcome to the stage Christina Paslar, Executive Vice President of ESG Products at Mastercard, for a conversation with Bloomberg Green's Lauren Keel.
Chris, my takeaway from that video is I absolutely do not want to live in a world without coffee. And so I'm very excited to hear all the things that you and MasterCard are doing to make sure that that is never the case for any of us. You touch so many different parts of the cycle. If you think about everything from the financial institutions that you work with at MasterCard, all the way through the consumers that have MasterCards in their pocket, how do you think about your role in climate action?
So look, Lauren, our role is really around bringing kind of all the pieces and the partners together. We truly believe on the effort that we need to do together, and that is what will bring us a big impact. We started by kind of in the sustainability side. We actually are doing 4 things. We started with our net zero commitment for 2040. And that is something that it's tracking very well, but actually we do not have a very big footprint. But we realize that we can have a big impact if we really kind of impact this entire ecosystem, if we mobilize all the thousands of financial institutions that are issuing our cards, if we mobilize all the 3 billion people that are behind the cards that we have globally today, the 90 million merchants, retailers that are accepting our cards. So we really feel that this power of the integrated, say, ecosystem is what can bring a positive impact, much beyond the net zero pledge that we have. So we also decided to, for that, bring carbon calculator. We partner with a Swedish company called Economy, and that is where now we have a number of banking customers for us that are providing to their cardholders a way for them to know how much CO2 footprint they have with their transactions, with their purchases. And that has been very telling. So information is something that it's very at the heart of what we do. And this is something that has been very engaging with the consumers and the banks. Second thing, we have done coalition, Priceless Planet Coalition. You just saw the video. And that is also with the focus of bringing all these partners together in a coalition to restore 100 million trees. And there we are focusing not only on the climate, but also how we bring that with the communities and the biodiversity. Fourth, we are also bringing kind of a now sustainable cards. So instead of working with PVC, plastic cards, we are starting to issue, we already issue hundreds of millions cards. Several of our banks adopted that. And we have a pledge that by 2028, all the MasterCard issued cards will be with sustainable materials.
Will those sustainable cards look exactly the same as the current cards, or will they be different?
I would say today you have a symbol you can see, but to be honest, in the future, that will be just the base. That will be mainstream because all the cards will be, sustainable. So today we have kind of a mark, and of course, issuers want to show that this is kind of a different material, that is a recycle, it's a sustainable. But in the future, that will be just the basis. All the cards should be kind of sustainable.
You mentioned the coalition,
yes,
some of your tree restoration efforts there. How did that coalition come into being? And how are you addressing with the coalition and with these efforts a lot of the challenges that you run into when you're planting trees with biodiversity, with the community actually supporting them, keeping those trees in the ground, keeping them alive.
Yeah. So first of all, we decided to partner with two important institutions in this space that really have all the knowledge to make sure that we have very high scientific quality levels, and they are Conservation International and the World Resources Institute. So it's a partnership between the two of them, and they are great partners, and that is kind of giving us the assurance that we are really doing the very high level quality for the climate. At the same time, we also designed that Priceless Planet Coalition should have a very important social aspect, because Mastercard has a heritage on financial inclusion. We've been doing that for more than a decade. That is so center and core to where we are and what we do. So we are bringing new individuals to the digital economy. For now more than 10 years, we have a goal to achieve 1 billion people by 2025, and we are tracking very well towards that goal. So that is actually working with communities, local small communities, several times small farm holders, as you saw in the video, working with this type of community, and bringing them to the digital economy. So for us, it was very important to also bring that social aspect to Priceless Planet Coalition alongside to the biodiversity, because again, not only for the communities, it's important that to have the tree up and kind of potentially even bringing more income to them, like fruits or nuts or something that it will actually bring for them kind of a way to have a better, sustainable, prosperous future. But at the same time, the biodiversity, bringing back the natural, species and how we restore and preserve what is there in a way that is positive to, again, the ones that are helping us to restore, to plant the trees.
And how are you communicating these efforts to your consumers? Are they part of the push that's driving you to do this?
Yeah, the consumers actually are really the engine behind this train, because to be honest, we feel that most of our partners, they are doing that because consumers care. We've been seeing the research, we've been tracking that for many years. And nowadays, and this number is always bringing up globally, 85% of consumers really want to partner with brands that are not only saying, but are concretely engaging them in something around sustainability. So consumers now, they know that they can vote with their wallets, right? And they can decide about the brands that they're partnering that really are engaging them. So we see that consumers are very engaged. They are kind of really willing to have this type of now the sustainable choices. And that is why we have the coalition working well, because the consumers are really kind of engaged. We are seeing the numbers, but also because all our partners also seeing their own research that this is what their clients want.
It's a good reminder that companies are listening when we vote with our wallets.
Exactly.
Chris, thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you so much, Lori.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Please welcome to the stage Serene Chen, Vice President of People and Culture at Carbon Direct, and Lee Hoffman, co-founder and president at Runwise, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Leslie Kaufman.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you've joined us. I think this panel is going to be fun because we're going to stop talking about the big issues, although big issues are involved, and start talking about individuals and their contributions. One of the things we wrote about earlier this year, at the very beginning of the year, was climate quitters. These are people who joined the quiet quitting movement but did it for climate reasons. Since then, the labor market has gotten to be a little less friendly. So I wonder, both of you who work in companies that are very involved with people who care about climate, have you seen, are there still climate quitters out there in your experience? Serene, do you want to just sort of start?
Sure, I'd love to. So hi, everyone. Great to be here today. I work for Carbon Direct, and we are an organization that helps other organizations set and equitably deliver on their climate commitments. So what that means is We have folks ranging from academia to tech to finance backgrounds. And if you take a step back from all the layoffs, right, the unemployment percent is actually 3.5% right now. And there was a report yesterday that there were 142,000 jobs added in clean energy just in the past 6 months. So I think the labor market is not as scary as some of the news may sound. And certainly for our roles, we see hundreds of applicants, especially for areas where there are transferable skills like sales, marketing, brand, and also even for the roles in our team that are more technical, forest carbon, soil carbon, we still get a ton of applicants. So yeah, climate quitting is definitely still a thing, and so is climate switching, folks changing within the industry because they want to experience something new.
Lee, too, you're still seeing a lot of interest in this area?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I'm Lee Hoffman. I'm one of the co-founders of the company Runwise. If you live in a building in New York or Boston or DC or Chicago, there's a good chance our technology is in that building. We run all of the energy systems from heating to cooling to water, and we typically reduce the energy usage and carbon profile of that building by about 20 to 25%. So it's a pretty major transformation. And to do that, you need a lot of people. You need engineers, software engineers who are writing code, building technology, but you also, more importantly, need people on the ground, people installing physical controls with electrical background, plumbing background. So when we talk about, are there still jobs in this industry, to me, it's a little funny because it's a little bit like going back to 1975 and looking at today and being like, are there jobs in the technology industry, right? Like, it would be laughable to ask that today because obviously most of the economy is being transformed by technology. 50 years ago, that didn't exist at all. And at the very beginning, you might have asked, well, how many jobs are going to be created here? And I think we're going to see something very similar in climate. We're just at the beginning of a fundamental transformation in how we run society. And that will touch every aspect of not only society, but of business, of culture, across the board. And so to do that, you're going to need a huge transformation of the job base for people, not just at the traditional skilled labor, but at the trade level to really be able to make that change. And I think when we look back in 10 or 20 years, we'll have a similar realization that we did with technology, where it's like, of course, a huge sector of the economy and a huge base of the employer base is now in the climate area.
But that said, do we have the right set of skills? It seems like there are a lot of people who want climate jobs, but maybe an English degree is not as helpful as knowing how to be an electrician. I mean, are you seeing that the skills match the jobs you actually need? Are you able to employ people of a variety of skills?
Absolutely. At Carbon Direct, we're really proud of the diversity of backgrounds of our team. So we have folks who have moved from academia, from government, from big tech, from startups, all to work at Carbon Direct. And I think that the intersection of those skills is actually what's really powerful. Earlier today, there were a lot of talks about the systemic nature of the change, right? That this is going to touch every part of the economy, every part of the world, every company out there if they're not already. And so actually, we need all of those skills. We have a lot of those skills. And when those intersections come together, I think, like Lee was saying, there are opportunities that we might not even know of right now. Like Carbon Direct, we just recently posted a role that was called the Environmental Justice and Climate Justice Strategist role, which is not one you would commonly expect at a climate tech company. That role got over 400 applicants within 48 hours, right? And that's a role that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in climate tech, but actually we fundamentally believe that we need to center equity and justice in the work that we're doing. And so, yes, we have and need all of those skills, and actually the intersection of them, I think, is going to be really powerful.
I think the number one barrier to hitting climate goals is none of the things that most people talk about. It's not capital, it's not attention. It is purely a lack of skilled labor in the key areas, and specifically in those trade labor areas. If you look at carbon emissions in the country, something like 40% of the carbon emissions comes from how buildings operate. You physically cannot transform buildings without having skilled labor that can go into those buildings, install updated systems, install new controls. These are gigantic, massive projects on a 12, 15, 20 million building scale. And what you're seeing there is the same in automotive, everywhere else, and we're just vastly lacking the number and qualified capability of people to be able to do those jobs, and I think it's a major challenge. What I'm excited about is that there are a lot of companies and technologies and programs that are springing up to help address this imbalance. But it is by far the #1 thing that's limiting our ability to hit our climate goals.
Yeah, so let's dig a little bit deeper into that, because we've seen that as well in our own reporting. And I wonder whether you feel like, you said there are some ways that we're changing that, but do you feel like the government money is also, we talked about the IRA and how that's changing things. Do you see a path forward in which we can train a young generation to be able to fill those jobs as they are needed, or an older generation?
I think so, but I think what the IRA does, and I want to make it a bigger umbrella, because the IRA is the thing that gets the attention on the federal headlines, but really the thing that's moving the needle are the local laws, like Local Law 97 in New York City is putting carbon caps on every building in the city. There are a fleet of these types of regulations that are forming across the country, and those are really driving, I think, most of the climate change and the movement towards climate beyond economics. And I think ultimately, like, what's happening is those are sort of like the accelerant. The fire's already lit, it's already burning, it's gonna take over the house eventually, but this is throwing lighter fluid on it, and it's really pushing people faster with more capital towards it. And I think ultimately what that does is doesn't necessarily help us bridge the gap with government programs, but it creates more attention, more money in those sectors that then let companies create training programs and create incentive by creating more jobs for people to actually go and learn the skills they need to learn.
And just to add on talent and succession planning, there was a report from the World Economic Forum, I think just yesterday or the day before, saying how one of the challenges, and there were oil and gas companies that said their biggest challenge was going to be talent and leadership, because the industries are changing so fast, they're so complex, and actually, if you don't have leaders who understand that complexity, who have knowledge, technical knowledge, discipline knowledge, as well as people knowledge, how to lead at scale, you're not going to have that transformational change. So, when I look back at college, because I was speaking at university recently, my job, I didn't know it existed. And it didn't exist because the company that I work for did not exist back then, right? And so how do we inspire young people? How do we inspire folks who are in organizations right now that they may be employees of companies that they don't feel like are doing enough about climate? Start somewhere, right? It's yes, come to climate, work in climate, but also there are climate switchers, and you can be that change in your own organization. I think that's really what's going to drive a lot of the transformation as well.
So let's talk a little bit about the people that you see. Are you just seeing young people, or are you seeing people of all ages? I mean, tell me about the people who most surprise you, who are coming in and want climate opportunities.
I mean, we have 100 and something employees, and range demographics, vary pretty significantly. And we've seen people who are, even in the trade skills, have been doing electrical work on old school electrical systems for 40 years at like gigantic company X. And now they see an opportunity to not only make twice as much money, but be able to actually have a huge impact on building carbon emissions directly, because they're going to buildings and they're putting in controls that day will literally lower the carbon profile of that building 25–30%. And so we see that all the time. I don't think it's just young people. I think like any other major wave that changes the way the economy functions, you're going to have everybody who is in that economy be impacted, and you're going to see a broad swath of those skills and individuals move into that sector.
Yeah, similar for us. We're really proud. Our workforce includes folks who are straight out of school almost, and folks, all 5 generations in the workforce at once in a small company, which is super exciting. But actually, I think what I find, again, the most inspiring about it is that there is that opportunity. You asked for the most surprising applicant. One of our folks, there was a sitting state legislator that applied for one of our roles once that I was expecting to conduct a phone screen with. So to say, there are the climate crisis, for the most part, happened. Very few people made decisions that impacted many, many others. And we need everyone to be part of the solution, because if we're not, and we don't take those underrepresented communities into account, we're actually, I think, going to perpetuate the issues that we're already in.
Yeah. So What about finances? I seem to recall when I got out of school and wanted to get involved in the environment, it was sort of an understanding that there would be a trade. Like if you did something that you felt passionate about, you were going to have to take a 20% clip or something like that. Do you still feel like there is inadequacies or inequalities in that? Are you still going to take, is there going to be a financial pain for going into climate-related work?
I don't think there has to be. I mean, I also worked in an environmental nonprofit, so yes, there is a financial difference between when you're in a nonprofit and when you're in a for-profit, but certainly when you're in a for-profit environment, I don't think that trade-off is really there anymore. Like when we benchmark our compensation, we are benchmarking against other companies of a similar valuation, not just in climate, it's against any climate or any tech companies of that similar valuation. So I don't think that trade-off is really there anymore, unless you're gonna work in nonprofit, in which it still is.
It's still better.
Yeah.
I think the beauty of when you look at especially tech-driven solutions to climate, which I think is where primarily we'll see most of the solutions long-term, there's a very healthy balance, which is if you're building something that really has a transformative positive impact and a good ROI, there's a net benefit to both the people buying and the people making it, right? They're saving more money than they're spending, and therefore they're willing to spend a certain amount, and that creates new jobs, new businesses, et cetera. And the great part of that is you see it throughout the tech sector, typically those companies then pay higher than average salaries, right? So people who come to our company, whether you're an engineer, a software engineer, and you work in your office at home, or you have trade skills and you're going into boiler rooms and you're installing a boiler control, you're typically making more than you were somewhere else because we're creating so much value by installing that technology that really has a meaningful impact on both the economics and the carbon and climate footprint.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to throw it out to the audience, because I think this is the kind of discussion people will have some thoughts on. But when you find yourself competing, are you competing against people who aren't doing for talent? Are you competing for people like inside your industry or outside the industry? I mean, do you find that you have people poaching now from within you, like competitors, or how big is this sector?
I'd say both. The sector is huge and growing. We have been very pleasantly surprised when folks from within climate tech apply to Carbon Direct jobs. I think that's a huge mark for our brand and the work that we're doing, being extremely science-backed. But we also, much of our software team, for example, is based in Seattle. We're actively competing with the Amazons, the Microsofts for that engineering talent because of the geographic location where we are. So a bit of both, but I think there's plenty of space for everyone.
There's such a shortage of really talented, skilled labor, both everything from software engineers, again, down to trade skills, I shouldn't say down, even up to trade skills, that I find most of the time we're just competing in general to get people in the door, right? And sometimes it is with other, climate companies, but more often than not, it's just how do we get really awesome, skilled labor in the door, because it's a really hard problem.
Yeah. Meg, did you want to? Yeah.
Sure, I've got a couple here. First one to you, Serene, just a little bit more clarity on what does Carbon Direct do and how are you working with clients to invest in climate action?
Yeah, absolutely. So Carbon Direct, we are a carbon management firm, and we work with companies like Microsoft, Alaska Airlines, Shopify, BlackRock on pretty much any stage of their climate journey. So some companies come to us and they might be very early, want to understand their measurement and their footprint and create a strategy. Other companies, like the ones I listed, might already have some very built out, robust sustainability strategies, and we might provide additional scientific due diligence, et cetera. So we have both a software platform that can help you with the measurement, reductions, reporting, and then we also have bespoke advisory as well.
Great, and to both of you, or whoever wants to answer, what do you see as the impact of local laws being issued to stop or restrain ESG-related developments in certain areas?
I would say, especially in the major cities, you're seeing sort of the reverse more than that specifically. Like in New York City, I gave it as an example, you have Local Law 97. In Boston, there's BERDO. Every major, especially big city, is implementing carbon legislation that is by far accelerating the trend. You're literally either putting carbon caps on buildings, you're putting requirements on reducing carbon. These things are having a huge transformative impact at the speed at which people are adopting these technologies, adopting change, and really making progress.
For talent that are looking to switch into sustainability-focused roles, how much room is there to acquire desired skills on the job versus having the transferable skills at the interview stage?
It depends on the role. So, right now we're hiring for a forest carbon scientist. If you do not have deep knowledge and expertise in forest carbon, you are not going to be a great fit for that role, and that's just the facts of it, right? But when we've hired in the past for content marketing or sales or even people and culture, you do not need to come from a climate background to make a huge impact in those types of roles. You have such transferable skills from your depth of expertise and your function that I think it's very, very situational. And actually for us, what we also look for is, can you handle our distributed, remote, startup, changing, ambiguous environment? Because if you can, I think you've got a great shot.
One last one to end on, which feels like a good one. What's one piece of advice you have for people who are looking to transition into climate work?
I used to say learn to code, and now I'd say learn trade skills.
I think for me, I do get asked this quite a lot. I think it's a phenomenal question. I think it's to understand exactly what it is you're trying to get into and why, because there's so much in this space. You've heard from companies ranging from some of the largest multinationals in the world to the two of us here, for Series A companies. There's a ton of opportunity, and everyone, the best thing I see in candidates is when they understand not only why are they applying to Carbon Direct, but why their skills are specifically applicable to our stage of company, our size of company, our maturity, the value that they can add, because that makes for, I think, the most compelling candidates.
Okay. I think that was a terrific place to leave it. So I want to thank you both for being on this panel. Thank you so much.
Leslie.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Bloomberg Green reporter Eric Roston.
Hi, everyone. I was at a sort of social event a couple of months ago, and I slipped into a conversation with a friend of mine who was talking to another man, an older man. I didn't know him. I didn't catch his name. But he seemed like a successful person, right? He spoke with a commanding voice, held himself well, had terrific posture. I introduced myself. I'm Eric Roston. I write about climate and energy at Bloomberg Green. He asked me about renewable energy, and I say, it's funny because I'm working on a big project about that now. And in a nutshell, we need 1 million miracles to beat back climate change. And just in the last 5 years or so, we've gotten like 1,000 of them. And one of the critical factors of that is that worldwide, increasingly, renewable power is cheaper than coal. And I finished saying that, and he said, yeah, but nobody's ever going to pay more for renewable power. So he's missing the big story, right? At Bloomberg Green, every day we write articles. And if you've ever seen one, an article is a thing about a company or a policy or a discovery or a conflict. And so what happens is we take these and we put all of them up on our mom's refrigerator, and they become this kind of mosaic. And this mosaic tells something different than a story. It's a storyline. And storylines are different than stories because they hardly ever change, right? There's some news events where you could skip a year of news and come back and understand, okay, same storyline. Sometimes it's 5 years. This storyline we're talking about today is changing very dramatically, very quickly, and has been for a couple of years. So what I've done is for people just coming back from a year off of climate news, maybe, or people who are just new to the space, here are 5 quick things that I think are important to understand this rapidly changing storyline. This is a spread from the latest issue of Green magazine. This 2-page chart you see here is actually, it's the same data that John Moore showed you this morning. There was $1.1 trillion in energy transition investment in 2022. It's a doubling of what we had in 2015 and a 31% increase over 2021 from last year. Now, there are very powerful vectors behind this. There are laws behind this. There are big companies driving this. But I want to be clear that you can't take it for granted. I've actually forgot to, point one is that prices change behavior and that the price of wind and solar has changed dramatically. That's fundamentally what's going on here. But as a caveat, I do want to point out something that a venture capitalist, Ryan Pachesaran, said from Kleiner Perkins. He had a book come out last year with John Doerr. He said, if I introduce you to the newest thing, to move you, to power you, to feed you, I am taking money away from someone else and saying, pick me instead. So that's what's driving this, and that's why you can't really take it for granted. So the Inflation Reduction Act came along last year. The European Green Deal came along a year before that. And this is what the world of climate finance looked like in 2019 and 2020 on average. This is data put together by a group called the Climate Policy Initiative. And it's a measure not of energy transition. This is a pool of $652 billion. This is money that is spent toward climate mitigation or a little bit on adaptation. And so you can see some trends here. You look at the top left quadrant of this chart, that's East Asia and basically China, which makes up about half of all spending. You can see that public and private spending are about at parity, which, ideally, I think private sector, once it gets moving, we'll see that ratio change. And on the end, you see where it's going. And so obviously the bulk of this money is going to new energy systems and then transport. My favorite line is this little tiny line coming up from the middle and feeding into public spending. That's basically US and Canadian government spending. And while it looks like it should be bigger, the interesting thing about government spending is it's actually usually tax credits and other regulatory tools like that. That's why the government lines are a little bit smaller than they might otherwise be. Here's just another look at the global picture. Americans who are engaged in this space are waking up to see that not only are we not in a leadership position, this is a space that until recently has belonged almost entirely to China. Half of all investment in 2022 came from China. So the second of my 5 points here is the ultimate motivator for the energy transition, which is climate change, is being supplanted on a day-to-day level by more immediate and even better motivators. And venture capital is a really good example of this, because you see just this year over year, not quite, and this year is going to be rough, increase in venture capital. And that is just like an archipelago of investors and companies who are just finding their little nooks and crannies. Again, when I said on the first slide, remember there's very powerful vectors here that will continue, but there's also a lot of noise, right? And this is going to be a year of noise. That venture capital investment bar is going to be like half that tall this year. Already in the first quarter, according to a note that Bloomberg NEF put out on Monday, US venture capital investment in climate stuff is down 54% over the rolling 4-quarter average. On the right, I kept this on. I think it's interesting to look at which sectors are earning, are getting the financing, and comparing it to where greenhouse gases are coming from. Like, it doesn't need to be a one-to-one thing, but I still think it's an interesting rule of thumb, an interesting mental check to see how out of whack investment is from greenhouse gases. So the third thing is, the best articulation of this I've seen recently was Peter Reinhardt is a serial entrepreneur. He runs Charm Industrial now, which is taking biomass and sort of turning it into goop and hiding it forever. He said that we need to rebuild almost all the infrastructure around us to eliminate fossil fuels emissions and return the atmosphere to its pre-industrial levels. So like, this is a whole planet, right? whole species wide affair. We have to go into every nook and cranny to find the emissions and wrestle them out. What I like about this chart, which shows the number of deals last year, venture capital deals in startups, it shows you, like, finally before our eyes, like, people are getting to the nooks and crannies. Like, people are getting up in the morning and trying to build batteries out of rusting iron and trying to use AI to, kill weeds in agricultural fields. There is just a humongous spread of activities in most places that we need them. There is, I tried to translate this joke into like a modern idiom, but I couldn't really do it. So there was this thing called the Soviet Union, and there was a joke about how an American economist goes to a conference in Vienna and meets a Soviet counterpart and says, "Dmitry, how's it going? In one word, tell me how the Soviet economy is going." Dmitry says, "Good." And then he says, "Good, that's great. In 2 words, tell me in 2 words how the Soviet economy is going." And he says, "Not good." So that's like point 4, is like there is deserved and important euphoria about the rate of change in the energy transition, but it's also not enough. Like right here in the black, that's funding from the last 18 years or so. Those are the 1,000 miracles I mentioned before. However, we also need like much more than that. This is Bloomberg NEF data projecting the amount of energy transition finance we need by mid-century. I'm going to skip this one, but a big shout out for energy nerds for the IEA Energy Technology Perspectives report in January. It's just pure joy. And the last thing is, I talked about storylines at the beginning, and I want to draw your attention to another very important usage of the word storylines. Climate scientists who have honed their conversational English skills sometimes talk about the scenarios they use to test their models as storylines. And so while at Bloomberg Green we get up every day and we write our stories and perpetuate the storyline as we're finding it in the world, and you all get up every day and participate in your storylines, this is the IPCC output from their August 2021 report showing representative scenarios, representative storylines of things that might happen. And it's easy to look at this and say, oh yeah, okay, IPCC model, and divorce that from our own experience. But every one of our jobs, every one of our lives, our consumer decisions, our behavior decisions, our voting decisions, every one of those is in one of the lines, whatever the actual line is going to be. Like, this is a very real chart. And it's and I encourage everyone to think about these global scientific conclusions. And it's not just science, it's not just data. We are a part of that storyline. We have the experience, we have the tools we need. All we have to do is the work, and it's a lot of work. Thank you very much.
Please welcome to the stage Ignacio Bincas, head of North America at H2 Pro, and Tulika Raj, CEO and co-founder of SunGreen H2, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Akshat Rati.
Welcome, everybody. Well, you're here at the Bloomberg Green Summit, but over the previous 2 days, we had our research on Bloomberg NEF have a summit in New York, and they had an award given out to startups called the Pioneer Awards. And they are awards given to early stage startups that are doing pioneering work, which they've given across many different sectors. When they started off a few years ago, it was around solar and wind and batteries. And as climate tech has progressed and is going towards harder to abate sectors, they've started giving out awards for food and for metals and for hydrogen. So we have 2 of the award winners with us on stage today. and they are focused on hydrogen. Now, we'll come to the hydrogen market, but let's just start with an elevator pitch for what your companies do, and maybe we start with you, Tulika.
Thanks, Akshat. Great to be here. I'm Tulika, CEO and co-founder of SunGreen H2. SunGreen H2 is supercharging all commercial electrolyzers using nanotechnology. And what that really means is we use nanotechnology and nanostructured components inside electrolyzers to double the output of hydrogen from a single machine, while using 10% lower energy consumption and reducing the use and reliance on precious metals by 30 times. So we're here to make green hydrogen affordable for all electrolyzers.
And energy efficiency is very important because if you look at estimates of where hydrogen consumption is headed, if we are on a track to reach net zero, according to Bloomberg NEF estimates, in 2050, a third of all electricity produced, which will be a lot more than the total electricity produced today, will be for hydrogen production. So you need to make that process a lot more efficient. Do you want to go with your elevator pitch now?
Yes, I'm Ignacio Vincas. I'm with H2 Pro, head of North America. Honored to be representing the company here. Very happy that we won the award. What makes us different is we've been producing hydrogen in addition to the normal now natural gas sourced hydrogen with electrolysis for over 100 years. But that technology is old. It has 60 to 70% energy efficiency. And gradually it's been improving, but we brought a step change, so we're 95% efficient. We do it a bit different with a thermochemical reaction in a two-step process. And so this allows us to produce more hydrogen with less electricity, and also bring down the cost, not just the operating cost, but the capital, because the rest of the energy is normally going to waste heat, for which you need more equipment to remove that heat from the system. So
you get double the benefit. You're not just reducing the total amount of energy needed, but you also have to deal with less of the waste heat. So you have to reduce the amount of components you're putting into the system.
Less equipment, and also the chemistry we use allows us to not use the typical platinum, iridium, expensive metals that are used in the anode in normal electrolysis.
Now, we talked about how by 2050 there's going to be a lot of hydrogen that will be needed if we are on the path to net zero, but you guys are going to scale up now. So H2 Pro was founded in 2019, SunGreen H2 was founded in 2020, you're new companies relatively speaking. So you are entering the market now. What is the market opportunity for both of you? Because you're making components for the hydrogen electrolyzer, and you're making the entire electrolyzer. So just talk us through the market opportunity right now.
So right now, the market of hydrogen is about 100 million tons per year production.
100 million tons of actual hydrogen.
Actual hydrogen produced.
And most of it is used for what?
So most of it is used in oil refining and ammonia production.
Okay. And so you're going to attack that market, and that if you're going to make green hydrogen, you're going to require electrolyzers that will split water. And one of the estimates suggests something like $130 billion worth of electrolyzers will be sold this decade in the remaining 7 years. So that's the size market you're going for.
So there's actually more, right? Because that's the existing hydrogen for those applications, but hydrogen will be used to decarbonize other industries like green steel. So that's additional hydrogen on top of that.
Right. So today you're using it for refineries and for ammonia production. But if you go down the green steel route, then you'll need hydrogen for more purposes.
You know, I would like to say that while there's a 100 million ton hydrogen market today, and all this hydrogen is being used for ammonia, methanol production, we've got to think about what low-cost renewables and affordable green hydrogen are going to make possible going forward. Even out to 2030, from 2025 to 2030 and beyond, you will find newer applications for green hydrogen, not least in transportation, long-duration energy storage, decarbonizing our power generation sector, and all of that is simply going to expand. And what I see, the IEA, for example, projects that the hydrogen market is going to go 5-fold to 2050, 500 million tons. And I see that green hydrogen, the low carbon form of producing hydrogen without any carbon dioxide emissions, can take a significant share of that, displacing almost entirely over a long period of time, the fossil fuel-based hydrogen production market. And what's going to be driving that is technologies like electrolyzers, components like ours. So we see in the immediate future a $1 billion addressable market opportunity just because we supply electrodes. We also supply certain types of stacks, and that just increases the market opportunity further. But the underlying market pie is growing even larger. So I think all of us have to be really focused on that expansion of the pie versus what the slice of the pie is right now.
But the hype around hydrogen is not a new one. There's an investor who spoke again at the Bloomberg NEF summit who said, that she had a ton of deals come to her desk in the past decade, but she didn't invest in any of them, invested in Tesla instead, and is now a successful investor because of that. Why do you think this time around, when again a lot of hydrogen companies are coming out, that this time investors are making the right bet by giving you money?
If I may address this. 15 years ago, we didn't have cheap renewables. One of the fundamental things that you need to make green hydrogen is green electrons from renewable electricity and the machines themselves, electrolyzers and the components that we make. It's only now, over the last 10 to 15 years, that we have seen a significant cost reduction in renewables. So cheap renewables are finally available, and the cheapest new form of generation in over 90% of the world's electricity markets currently is new wind and solar. So it's because we have low-cost, affordable renewables that low-cost, affordable derivatives like green molecules, like green hydrogen, are finally becoming possible. And this is primarily what is different about the hydrogen market this time around versus 10 to 15 years ago, is what I would say.
Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so we have, like Tulika said, lower cost of green power. We have lower cost electrolyzers. We continue to improve. So now we're getting to the point where it can be competitive. And when you add things like the incentives in the IRA, then all of a sudden it will be cheaper eventually to do green hydrogen. I mean, the H2 Pro is working on enabling $1 per kilogram of hydrogen by the end of this decade, with the lower CapEx and OpEx we bring to these systems. And that is before the IRA. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The three people here are, you live in Singapore, your company is Singapore-based, your company is based in Israel, even though you live here. Right. I live in London, but we are all talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, and especially on hydrogen, the kinds of incentives, and these are incentives that are coming in the form of actual money given for production of hydrogen, are the most attractive around the world. And so all of you are now looking to the US for trying to figure out where you can build or you can sell your product. When you come in, what are the difficulties now that you do have this government incentive available? What are the difficulties you have to overcome to enter a crowded space?
So like you said, there's a lot of incumbents already on electrolysis, right? So we're an Israeli company. We saw the IRA and the market focus shifted maybe more from Europe to the US now, right? So now I'm here to get the business for H2 Pro started in the US. And
you were hired right after the Inflation Reduction Act.
Right, yes. Well, so that's when they started the search, and I'm here now, and which is great. So what's the challenge? So we have a new technology. It's very different, right? When you say 95% efficiency, it gets people attention, but it gets them, can I go see one? Well, we can go see a prototype in Israel.
Right.
It's not as convenient as having one here. So working through the market, educating them as to how the technology works so they can take a look under the hood and understand what it is that we're doing, that's a challenge.
That's the challenge.
I'm facing. Yeah.
How about you?
Akshat, if I may say so, you talk about the market being competitive, but let's take a step back and look at what the market is. The entire global sales of electrolyzers last year were 1 gigawatt. The demand for electrolyzers out to 2030 is 100 gigawatts. This is a massive increase in demand, and I think supply has to catch up. If you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, there is a lot of focus on electrolyzer manufacturing, but predominantly there's buckets there that are of a lot of appeal to companies like ourselves because they focus on localizing the supply chain, building domestic manufacturing capabilities, in advanced electrolyzer components. And I think there's a role that regulation has to play, and there's a role that technology has to play. The role of regulation is to enable the market to develop. And the role that technologies like ours are doing is to bring down that cost differential between the incumbent fossil fuel-based hydrogen production faster by using technology that can double output, increase efficiency, reduce the reliance on precious metals. And all of this, both policy drivers as well as technology enablement, is going towards making affordable green hydrogen, because it's only when you're able to compete at cost with fossil fuel-based resource that you can go for wide-scale adoption and decarbonization of hard-to-abate sectors like green steel, ammonia, so on and so forth.
The credit that the Inflation Reduction Act is providing is going toward trying to make green hydrogen, which is more expensive than making it from natural gas today, cheap enough so that it can compete. But again, you started these companies before Joe Biden was elected or the Inflation Reduction Act was ever thought of. So you clearly had a base case to make within the countries that the companies were created in. So talk me through, what is it the market that you were looking at when you first created the company, and why was it the best place to create it in Singapore or in Israel?
SunGreen H2 was formed just over 2 years ago. And what we were seeing at the time, while we're Singapore and Melbourne based, we have a production in Melbourne and we're headquartered in Singapore. What we were really seeing is the European Union, which has been traditionally a leader in adoption of clean energy, and where the financing for these types of clean energy and renewables has typically been at a more higher ratio, let's say, than other nations, including in the United States. We were seeing fast developments in the hydrogen sector. Even before the Ukraine crisis, which is unfortunate to the extreme, we were seeing that the European governments were having a really focused approach towards energy independence and securing supply from non-traditional fuel sources. The last time we saw the European governments really get behind any kind of policy incentive, this was 15 years ago when we had the generous feed-in tariffs for wind and solar. As a result, we today have massive supply chains, manufacturing of solar panels and wind turbines. And because of this large volume of production, we've seen the cost come down drastically in the wind and solar business. So our hypothesis, based on what we were seeing happen in Europe, and increasingly we're Asia-Pacific based in Japan, South Korea, is the hydrogen economy finally start to emerge. And this is what led us to form the company to try and address the need for improving the output of electrolyzers as the industry scaled up.
But the real cost declines that we saw in solar came through Chinese manufacturing. You're based in Singapore and you're manufacturing in Australia. They're not typically the cheap places to get either labor or manufacturing costs. So why in those two places?
That's a great question. We need to think about why the cost of anything comes down. Actually, for every doubling of manufacturing output, there is a certain learning curve that you come down. Now, you can go to countries where the labor cost input is so low that cheap manufacturing can happen in that way. However, most of the manufacturing processes involved in the stack assembly, the building out of components, as well as assembling of electrolyzer systems, I would argue, are highly automatable. So in other words, we can make technology work for us, and I think it's increasingly the view with a lot of the regulation and the carbon border adjustment mechanisms that we see in various forms, carbon taxation. I think the view this time around is that we shouldn't let all manufacturing go pool into, geopolitically, we shouldn't let all manufacturing pool into one particular region of the world. Rather, decentralize manufacturing, localizing supply chains, and being able to be resilient and robust about creating jobs in the immediate markets that are using the technologies of predominant interest. And I think that is really what is driving, I would say, clean tech 2.0. That's why it's going to be different this time, the way manufacturing is done.
What about Israel and hydrogen?
So, to the first part of the question, so we saw that there's no decarbonization, no net zero without hydrogen, right? So, and we had in Israel, in the Technical University, this research that started in 2012 that had this step change in hydrogen production. And so now, yes, we're starting manufacturing there, but the way we bring out costs, like Tulika was saying, is it's not like looking for lower cost labor, but it's rather using different materials, automating. So our first factory is already leased, and it's in Israel, and we are looking where we put our second factory to start producing in 2027.
Now, we're also talking at a time where venture capital funding, largely, not climate tech alone, has declined. This is tied to macroeconomic factors, recession may be coming. Have you seen that in your own trying to raise money situation where you go to investors and you're trying to pitch and you're not getting as high a valuation as you had thought, or you're not getting as much cash as you want to be able to do what you want to do?
Want to go first?
So I'm not the one working on that, but I can tell you we've raised through Series A and B over 100 million. So in that sense, we're comfortable. However, there's discussion about round C coming up. I can't comment as to whether we're finding roadblocks or not.
Right.
Yeah, likewise, I'd say that we're a younger company and we've just closed a seed round of funding. We're going into a Series A, and we would argue that depending on the sector that you're in, the VC climate can be unimpacted. We're seeing a strong amount of interest from thematic investors who have strong views on energy tech, climate tech, hydrogen tech, if you may, and it really depends on what part of the business you're in. Certainly, I think we're bucking the trend with this.
And at least you did come from the oil and gas industry, and we just had a panel discussion talking about people who are quitting oil and gas to work on climate change. What was your journey like making this transition?
So when I was a young engineer, I'm an electrical engineer by training, I found myself on the offshore oil and gas rigs in Kazakhstan and Norway. And even as a very young engineer, it was a very natural pivot for me back in the day, 15 years ago, when BP started working on wind and solar. It was a very natural pivot for me to say, hey, as a young person, I can really see the future, in a renewable resource and wind and solar. So it was a very easy decision in a way. 15 years ago, it was probably unsexy at the time, and maybe a few people thought I was a bit crazy. However, it's just never, once, it's like seeing the light. Once you've seen the light, in terms of a sustainable, circular, natural way of living and harnessing natural resources that are renewable, I don't think there's ever any going back. So it was kind of natural in that sense.
And anything from your past in working in different sectors that informs your work now?
So, well, I started my career mostly in refining, petrochemicals, even ammonia throughout the years. So I've been around hydrogen, gray hydrogen, for a long time. But on my last job before this one, we had a lot of focus on sustainability, a lot of focus on the growth of low carbon hydrogen. So I made the decision I wanted to pivot to 100% of my work being devoted to that. Ideally with a startup, so that's how I ended up with H2 Pro.
Wonderful. Well, I hope you enjoy the conversation with these two startups. You can hear a lot more about climate tech and both investing but also startups on a podcast that I host for Bloomberg Green called Zero. If you're into podcasts, I would hope you would subscribe. But for now, please thank Talika and Ignacia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Climate equity is really important to us. We want to make sure that nobody is left behind. COP is a great place for us to talk about this transition.
For GM, we really take pride in acting as leaders to be able to help make the transition to an all-electric future for all.
This technology is here. Now it's a matter of how to create an environment where it gets adapted around the world.
Climate change is urgent. We're proud to bring people together to work on those opportunities for the future.
Please welcome to the stage Hina Baloch, Executive Director and Global Head of Climate Change Communications and Strategy at General Motors, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Lauren Keel.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me here. One more time.
One more time. Sustainability is a journey and not a destination. So I ask you, where do you feel like GM is right now in your sustainability journey?
So I think at GM in the last few years, we've made several commitments. The commitment to be carbon neutral in our product and operations by 2040, the commitment to eliminate tailpipe emissions by 2035, the commitment to be renewable energy dependent across all of our plants and facilities by 2025 in the US and then 2035 globally. We've also made significant commitment into our all-electric future, investing $35 billion in the next 5 years in growing our EV and AV capacity, and then adding 2 million EV units by 2025 across the globe. So these commitments are very important. We stand behind them. It's taken a lot of work to get to this point. But I think what's important, Lauren, is the urgency of action, right? That's something that we're really pushing towards. I remember I was sitting with you, I don't know if it was COP or this conference, but I quoted a Persian poet who said, "Mahar cheez ba dast dade ba shimas dast dadi," meaning that whatever we could have lost has been lost. So I feel that this is a message that we are pushing as climate advocates within the company, that the claims are very important in our journey, but now is the time to really push for the urgency of action is what I would say where we are in the journey in the company.
We've heard today from a lot of newer companies, younger companies, which I think is very common in the climate tech space and in the climate space more generally, but General Motors has been around for, I think, 115 years. Yes. So how do you think innovation is important to you as the culture, as part of the culture at GM?
Yeah. Innovation is absolutely important, particularly in our climate journey. Innovation is important. All the claims that I talked to you about, they cannot happen in isolation. And I feel that, I always, I read a lot the books of a very famous climate fiction writer, Ursula K. Le Guin. I'm not sure how many people in the audience are familiar with her work, but there is something that she talks about, and there is actually a whole letter she wrote about that, which was around the collective back theory. So really kind of talking about solutions and things that can happen across different centers of excellence and from different people around the world. So I think my fear personally is that we could be moving from being a culture as a world, as a country, of being tech bros to now decarb bros. So there is, I sort of fear that, and I think keeping that in mind, the philosophy that I and a lot of other people at General Motors are trying to push for is this collective back theory of innovation, where ideas can come from anywhere in the company, doesn't matter what level you're at, it doesn't matter how big you are as a company or how small you are as a company. And I would say we have 3 different approaches that we have taken, and some of the work that I've spearheaded. We have a partnership with MIT Solve, and we also have a partnership with XPRIZE, and those are the 2 platforms that are sort of global crowd-solving, crowd innovation sort of platforms that are bringing together people from all around the world, including non-Western world, because I think de-Westernization and decolonization of innovation is also very important when we talk about innovation in the climate space. We also rely on employees a lot. GM has a platform that's called iHub, and that really invites employees from across the company to bring their innovative solutions, whether it is climate or any other topic. Right now, we are running an iHub program for employees that's focused on circularity in sustainability. And then we also do a lot of partnerships. You mentioned startups at the beginning of our conversation. We have partnered with a number of startups in the recent history. I would want to mention our partnership with Wind Catching System. It's a Norway-based offshore floating energy making organization. We also have partnership with RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, and there's a partnership that's focused on virtual power plants. We're also working with pretty much, I would say, one of the biggest focus areas, and something that I'm very excited about is how do we electrify the fleet. So the entire idea of Bright Drop by GM is focused on fleet electrification. That's another innovative approach that the company is taking that's happening from within the company. So I think I would say a multi-pronged approach here, looking at organizations like Solve and XPRIZE that are helping with de-Westernization and decolonization of innovation, relying on our employee base with platforms like iHub, and then going out and connecting with amazing startups that are doing some brilliant work, and definitely looking beyond decarb bros.
What a good place to leave it. Thank you so much, Hina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Cal Penn. On my new show, Getting Warmer, we're talking all things climate.
How we live is going to have to change.
I want to move beyond climate doomism and take you on a journey to discover the boldest new ideas and solutions.
If you're a politician, pass laws now. If you are a business, create options.
On our way to a carbon neutral future. This is Getting Warmer. It's a lot of Taco Bell hot sauce packets.
Please welcome to the stage Penn, actor, author, and host of the Bloomberg original series Getting Warmer, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Meg Szabo.
How's it going?
Hi, everybody.
Thank you. Good.
In the afternoon, so we got to keep the energy high.
Yeah, I know.
All right. I mean, I don't even think I need to introduce you, but obviously everybody knows Penn. What I wanted to start with, which I think everybody wants to know, is how did you start? You went from Harold and Kumar to the White House to Getting Warmer. Like, how did that happen? Walk us through.
That's a nice segue for me to sell my book to all of you.
I forgot author in there.
But
sorry.
yeah, thank you. No, look, I grew up not too far from here in New Jersey. I went to a public high school. I always had varied interests, and I was, I think, very fortunate to have the support or encouragement of a lot of folks around me who kind of embraced the idea that the world is not made up of mutually exclusive choices. So my first love, I think, will always be comedy and making people laugh, but one of the great unifiers of comedy is the opportunity to kind of exchange ideas, and I'm by nature sort of an optimist. So when a show like Getting Warmer came across and they said, we want to do a docuseries that's not doom and gloom, but that's based more on climate solutions, it just seemed like the right fit.
The right place to go.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love it. So when you worked at the White House, you did work a lot with youth activists. You've been around activism quite a bit.
Yeah.
I know you don't classify yourself as a full-on activist since it's not your full-time job, but what have you seen since you have kind of been around it a lot? What works to be a successful activist, and specifically maybe in the climate space?
You're right. Look, I'm not an activist. I certainly consider myself an advocate, but one of the reasons that I don't think I'm an activist is I don't want to disrespect actual activists who are doing the real work day in and day out, or who are doing it professionally. I'm certainly not an expert on any of this, but I think one of the eye-opening things for me that in answering that question, and this was now 10 years ago when I worked in the Obama White House, primarily as the president's point person on outreach to young people, was the degree to which there really isn't a playbook on the best way to engage. And I think for especially a lot of young people in the climate movement, I would include myself in this when I was in high school or college, there wasn't really a sense of, is now the best time to protest? Is now the best time to write a letter, to put on a suit and meet with somebody, to focus on a corporation, to focus on our own individual behaviors? And that's obviously always malleable and it's always changing, but one of the things I learned when I was working in government, I just remember my boss was big on the Hatch Act, so there were all these ethics laws that you couldn't violate. I know the people after that kind of threw those out the window, but in my case, we weren't allowed to say, I would have these incredibly energetic young people who would say, we want the president to do this on climate. And the information would be presented in a way that was almost like, we know he doesn't want to do that. And I'm like, no, he really does, but he needs votes in the Senate. And I remember not being able to say that last part, right? And not being able to say, here are the 7 senators you should target if you really want comprehensive climate legislation to get done. I wasn't allowed to say that. And because young people by nature, it's one of the only demographics you age out of, right? You're a senior citizen forever once you reach that point. Any other sort of ethnic group, you're probably identifying that way through most of your life. So there isn't the institutional memory that exists in other organizations. And since young people lead the climate movement in such bold, wonderful ways, that also means that they don't often get to enjoy the fruits of all the activism or all the work that they put in. I think the Inflation Reduction Act is a great example of that. It's probably been decades of really hard lobbying by young people who are no longer 19 years old when Biden signed something like that. And so it's really tough to remind folks, like, what you did 10 years ago is the reason that we now have the political space for somebody to act on something like that.
Yeah.
Very long-winded way of saying I think it's really complicated, but that's one of the things that excites me in terms of what the opportunity is in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. So, moving to Getting Warmer, I am just curious, how many people in the room have watched Getting Warmer, an episode of Getting Warmer? All right, that's good. We got like 50% in this room. I am obsessed with it personally as a climate nerd. I think it's the climate school that we all need to go to, just to know the facts about these issues that a lot of people don't know about. What do you find? I think somebody like you hosting the show has brought a lot of awareness to this issue. What do you feel like the role is of that, of bringing awareness and trying to get people to engage in it?
Yeah, I mean, my role was kind of interesting in that I also felt like I went to that school, right? The show itself is about solutions, and it's about people who are doing the right things, and it's kind of a cross-section between advocates or activists, certainly business, and the role that government or regulations can play. And because we haven't necessarily had a show with that sort of a focus that doesn't also have the doom and gloom component, it creates an opportunity for that kind of a dialogue. And I think many of you who have seen it, I assume, probably first saw a clip of it that was trending online, or a little clip that was like, oh, I didn't know this about crypto, or this about recycling, or things that, like, I read the paper and I didn't know about this. I know we were talking backstage, but it's like, some of that information that's in there I would have thought would have been a much bigger story than it is. So it's been very exciting to be able to focus on that stuff for a couple of reasons. One, if you care about climate or climate issues, then you just organically, I think, would gravitate towards it. But then number two, if you're one of those people who's like, what can I actually do besides putting the glass bottle in the right garbage can? Like, well, there's a whole slew of things, from the places you can invest your money, to the companies that you maybe don't want to work with, to people who maybe thought they were doing the right thing, and then all of a sudden, things are going in a different direction. So going to that school in real life was really eye-opening.
It was amazing. Okay, so one of the things that you did on the show was an expedition to Brooklyn, right around the corner.
Yep.
Let's take a quick look and see what oysters, necklaces, and you in waders have to do with protecting coastal cities.
Okay.
Oh, look, you can see the big blue crab. Look, there it is.
Right here?
Yes, look right just below where I am.
Look, whoa. I'm out here on the Brooklyn waterfront sporting the latest in bright orange life jacket fashion to see something that could help protect New York from the next big hurricane. Tanasia here is part of the Billion Oyster Project, an organization that wants to grow just ungodly amounts of shellfish and use them to make New York Harbor less frighteningly polluted.
So oysters are filter feeders. So these oysters here are actually helping to filter the water that's here.
That's why they taste so good. They're also lending their oysters to a project called Living Breakwaters, which is taking an unorthodox approach to protecting coastlines from the next superstorm. It's just one of many ideas people are coming up with to protect coastal cities from the effects of climate change, as rising seas and stronger storms threaten to make Hurricane Sandy level flooding much more frequent.
One of the things that happened in the wake of Sandy is we wanted to figure out how we could keep the water out, right? But this is New York. Water is part of who we are. The Living Breakwaters Project, it is a string or necklace of breakwaters. These structures of rock in the water, about half a mile long, off the south shore of Staten Island, that will reduce risk to the shoreline from erosion and storm waves and help restore ecosystems.
All right, so I personally have never been in the water anywhere near New York City. Like, what was that experience like for you?
It was different than I thought it was going to be, for sure. I mean, I joked about this in the episode, but obviously these are not oysters you should eat. But the water has so much life. There's the ecosystem that I think we saw and that she was describing is not something that I think many of us who were either born and raised around New York City or live here now think is possible. So number one, that was very eye-opening. But number two was just this creative solution on how to mitigate some of the effects of climate change. It certainly doesn't solve the cause of it, but it was exciting to know that there were people who were also working on ways to mitigate that.
Yeah. What do you think is the main challenge? And I think we talked about this a little bit, but really that main challenge to get people to actually take that action and make those changes that you were talking about a little bit before?
I don't know. I mean, the For me, certainly a lot of it was not necessarily recognizing how impactful my personal behavior could be. And it's one of the trends you'll see if you, throughout a couple of the episodes, is what's the role of the consumer, and to what extent is the onus on the consumer to tell companies that they don't want certain things, or to make certain choices, or to pay a little bit more for something. And the obvious through line there is it's folks who have an income above a certain amount who have the luxury of making those choices largely, right? We're not the ones who have to make a choice on either cost or convenience. A lot of these things are a luxury for us. And so I think it's the responsibility lies on the proverbial, and just to be clear, it's not like the 1% of the 1% who are making billions of dollars. I'm talking about pretty much anybody who can afford to live in New York City. I guess that's 50% of us then, if you read the Times this morning. But but it's that, right? It's like those of us who have the means should do these things so that the price of that will drop and it'll be more accessible, it'll be better for the climate. So that's one thing that I think a lot of times is missed. It's not by accident, and obviously companies don't want you to feel like you should pressure them, but you should pressure them. And that's one of the many ways that I think we can hopefully change some things.
Yeah, I get the sense a lot of times that people have this idea that, oh, it's just too big. I can't. Like, what am I going to do? Like you said. And so it's really hard to get people to overcome that sometimes. So you covered a lot of different issues on getting warmer. As we talked about, recyclables was the one that surprised me, which is, just so you know, most of the things you put in that recycling bin do not actually get recycled, which was terrifying to find out.
Yeah.
But you covered that. You covered methane. You covered crypto. What, in your journeys and all of your travels and the show that you did, what was, you think, the most surprising thing that you learned during this process?
All right, you mentioned recycling. Can I give you two answers? I'll give you the like what's the shittiest one, and then what's the one overall?
Yeah, what's the good, what's the bad?
So I'll be more eloquent. The more disappointing one was what you said was about recycling. So it was, I can't remember the exact stat, something like 7 or 8%.
Yeah, I think it's like 8% of things you put in the recycling bin are actually recycled. Yeah.
But one of the reasons for that was very eye-opening was, you see the toothpaste tube and it says it's 100% recyclable. Nobody's going to read the fine print, which says, oh, it's actually this company that makes the toothpaste tube that paid another company a certain amount of money so that 10,000 of these could actually get recycled if you mail them in to an external facility. And because of that, they get to say that it's recyclable. Like, okay, technically recyclable, 10,000 of them, but it's not municipally recyclable. And one of the reasons for that is that the cost to municipalities of recycling is so high that unless they're able to do it en masse, or unless they're being paid to do it, the product they get out of that they can resell isn't sufficient enough, which kind of goes back to what we were saying, that it's sort of the onus is on corporations and consumers to change their behavior. So that was one of the ones that I was like, this is a real bummer. But for as much of the bummers as there's also immense opportunity. I'm really proud of that episode because my hope is that it'll lead to folks recognizing, oh, we're the ones who are going to be able to do more. The other piece of it, though, that I thought was tremendous was we have an episode on batteries, and I got to sit down with the CEO of Panasonic Green, or Panasonic North America, Panasonic Green North America.
Yeah.
And off camera, he was like, I said, thanks, man, thanks for doing this. And he goes, yeah, we realized Panasonic is responsible for 2% of global CO2 emissions, so we thought, we have to. And I just was like, 2%? How embarrassing is that for you? And he goes, no, I know, that's why we're doing this show. I'm like, can I ask you that on camera? And he's like, yes, it's not a secret. Like, we were so embarrassed by this that we decided to let people know that this is a real problem. So he then took me through the ways in which they're trying to invest in closed loop battery manufacturing, the numbers on when they break even in terms of carbon emissions, and all of the energy that goes into even that sort of a manufacturing. That was amazing. To me, that was life-changing. That could be planet-changing.
Yeah.
The idea that we would rather put 2 front-page New York Times stories on Tucker Carlson getting fired instead of on something like this really illustrates the problem. Like, the stakes are way higher if we cover a really good story.
Yeah, clap for that one.
So to me, that's a really good thing, right? I'm so proud of the show. I wish we would do more of that. For any of you who are content creators, like steal these ideas and do whole features on them. Like there's so much out there and so many people doing so much good.
Yeah, you're right. I do think, and this show, I feel like, is taking a huge leap towards getting people to really start to comprehend what we need to do. So thank you so much for doing it. Truly, I am just so grateful personally that we have this show and that it exists. If you have not watched Getting Warmer, please go. It's our great new Bloomberg Originals show. And please make sure to check it out. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, sir.
Please welcome to the stage Extrapolations creator and executive producer Scott Z. Burns and executive producer Dorothy Fortenberry for a conversation with Bloomberg's John Frayer.
Scott, Dorothy, thank you for joining us today. Congratulations on the show. I finished watching it on the way here. I think it's really interesting, really thought-provoking exploration of not just climate change, but memory, loss, capitalism, our relationship with technology. And it's just a really interesting sort of mashup of genres. It's like a really interesting Apple TV, everyone. Go and watch it after this panel. But I'd like to frame this conversation a little bit around climate storytelling. So I'm an editor at Bloomberg Green, and we obviously talk a lot, spend all of our time thinking about climate storytelling. And it feels like, we talked about this earlier, there's like 100 hospital shows, there's 100 police procedural shows. Why is it that until now we haven't really had many shows about climate change? Scott or Dorothy, do you?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, I think part of it is because people who really didn't want a fast green energy transition spent a lot of time and money making the question for 20 years, do you believe in climate change? And there was a really focused, well-funded, well-orchestrated, brilliant campaign to make it a controversial question that mostly lived in this kind of ineffable realm. Like, we believe or don't believe in Santa Claus, right? Like that's the kind of conversation we were having about climate change. And that's not an interesting TV show. Two people arguing, I believe, well, I don't believe. Well, but I believe, well, but I don't believe is incredibly boring, and you can't, cut to commercial and have people come back and want to see what happens next. So I think our whole understanding of how we talk about climate change was really framed by this notion that it is controversial and unknowable, when in fact it is happening. And there are a million stories you can tell, but you have to accept the premise to begin with that it is real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for us, the exercise was no longer how do you deal with climate deniers. I think years ago, when we made An Inconvenient Truth, that was something we had to contend with. Now, what we were more interested in was, how do we live through this? What does life look like? What does it look like to raise a child? What does it look like to go to work in the morning? And so we wanted to go from sort of this question of, is there climate change or not, to there, this is something we're all living with, so let's start telling stories about it.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of the show is like how you talk about technology, and we'll get back to that in a moment. But one of the, again, coming from the journalistic perspective, one of the challenges with telling stories about climate is that it can be seen as very kale and broccoli. It's something that no one really wants to think about that much, and sort of the nitty-gritties of it are, it's rooted in, the cause and the solutions are rooted in science. When you were pitching the show, like, was that a problem for you to sort of persuade the potential funders that actually, no, this can be really interesting and exciting?
Well, first of all, I really wish that I could somehow disabuse people of this kale and broccoli thing. No. Stories are stories, and they're filled with people, and I want to believe that you can tell a cool story about anything. And I also want us to start questioning, why did we get to a place where the prevalent narrative is that this is kale and broccoli, or that it's too big or too hard. We don't seem to give up in the face of other things quite so quickly, but yet in the media, we constantly are hearing this is so big, and then it's not surprising that a 5-year-old child will look at its mom and say, I don't know what to do. So first thing that I think we wanted to do was sort of call into question the origins and the purveyors of the narrative, that the kale narrative. I think the second part is, and this was really encouraging, Apple was not the only buyer that responded to our pitch. There were actually 3 really legit buyers, and there were 2 other streamers that expressed a lot of interest but were developing climate shows of their own. So this wasn't, this wasn't the uphill battle public service announcement that I'm very suspicious of being connected to the kale narrative. So I think those 2 things are one and the same, and that we need to get beyond that.
Yeah, and I'll just say on the subject of kale, no disrespect to kale, we're currently living in a 1.1 degrees Celsius climate changed world. We know for a fact, because of our lives, that people living in climate change, like, go to bars, tell jokes, have fights with their parents, have sex. Like, those things all happen in climate change because we did them earlier today. Like, so the idea that a TV show about climate change would just be a bunch of people, like, looking at a graph and frowning is not true. Like,
Well, we do a lot of that at Bloomberg Green.
Like, we are in our show, people are, making food for their kids and, trying to get to work and trying to earn a living and falling in love and all the things that we all do. And I think that was the most important thing for me and Scott, was that it is something that is going to happen that people will live through, and they will live like people do through any other kind of challenge.
So climate is like the backdrop to all of these other sort of human stories taking place, yeah.
Yeah, Dorothy is fond of saying, and I've stolen it so many times, and now I'm going to do it right in front of you, that it's the shows that pretend that the climate isn't changing, the ones that manage to ignore it season after season, those are actually the science fiction shows. Our show really tried to deal with the reality of what's going on, and then the experiment for us was, so think about your favorite story, whether it's Hamlet or Charlotte's Web or whatever it is. How does that story change in a climate changed world? And the other thing is, climate change doesn't look the same everywhere you go. And we wanted the show to be very far-flung for that reason. It's a really different experience if you're living in a coastal community that's dealing with sea level rise than if you're living in a farming community where there is no rain and there's drought and your farm is failing, and now there's huge human migration going on. So, we wanted to look at all of these aspects and hopefully get people to start looking, beyond Bloomberg Green as just being where they might find this, and start looking for it everywhere.
And one of the most distinctive aspects of the show, and much commented on, of course, is the star-studded cast. You've got Meryl Streep, who voices, at one point voices a whale, and is also the mother of Sienna Miller, who's in the show, Edward Norton. Can you talk us a little bit through the process of getting all of those wonderful people on board?
Yeah, look, all of the people in our show have choices. Meryl had a lot of other things she could have done. So I hope part of the reason that they said yes was because they care about this issue as passionately as Dorothy and I do. But I also hope that, like any piece of entertainment and any character they're going to play, they saw something on the page that they wanted to inhabit. And one of the really gratifying things for us was you meet, people like Yara Shahidi, who is an activist and a miraculous human being on every level. So there were people who were at that stage of their development, but there are also people, like Kit Harington, who would say that he cared about this, but he didn't know as much. And so we became, kind of a really great group of people where we could talk about this, and there were different levels of expertise that people brought with them.
So yeah, I want to talk about technology and how it's portrayed in the series. It looks, well, certainly the rich people, the people living in the richer part of the world, are living in this, in some ways, it looks like a beautiful Steve Jobs-like universe with hologram watches and beautiful clean interiors. And then poorer people, I think episode 5, which is set in India, living in this sort of Mad Max hellscape. And I think, to your point, different people experiencing climate change in a different way. But I think there's also a deeper philosophical engagement with the question of tech and capitalism in solving the climate crisis, and again, bringing it back to Bloomberg Green. We write a lot about that, the role of technology, the role of capitalism in solving the climate crisis. And I think that's particularly brought out in the clip that I want to show here. I'll just introduce it a little bit before we show it. So in the scene we're about to see, I think it's episode 4, and a scientist played by Indira Varma, she's in a state-of-the-art drone, and she's threatening to commit an act of eco-terrorism and release calcium carbonate into the atmosphere. This is an audience of climate geeks. It's geoengineering. And in this scene, she's sort of beamed into the Oval Office where her ex-husband, played by Ed Norton, is trying to talk her out of it. So please take a look and roll the scene.
Madam President, I'm sure Jonathan has told you about the bear and the lion. And maybe he's told you that what I'm doing is a reckless experiment that can only be done once.
That's right, because it is. Okay, look, you don't know what's going to happen. Even if you get it right, what'll happen to the ozone layer? You don't know. What'll happen to the oceans? You don't know. The 2 billion people you say you're trying to save, you're about to drop another climate volatility event right on their heads. How does that...
But the real reckless experiment is the one civilization has been running.
Nobody was trying to change the climate. We didn't even think that we had that capacity. We didn't know better, but we do now.
And yet, human behavior doesn't change. The sky is easier to re-engineer than the human brain, John.
Exactly. And if you tell that greedy monkey brain it's cooled off and everything's okay, it's going to say, give me a little bit more, just let me burn a little bit more, just let me mortgage a little more of the children's future so that I can make sure I can juice this quarterly balance sheet. I just need that one. It's Gita, even if you got all of the chemical interactions right, if you got the dispersal pattern right, the problem here is bigger than the heat of the sun, Gita. It's the way we see the world. And you alone up in the plane with this technology, this is not going to solve the problem.
Yeah, so says the problem.
So it's a great scene, and it's one of my favorite episodes in the series. But I'll ask us a slightly provocative question here. I couldn't help but detect, through the course of the 8 episodes, a certain skepticism in the show about technology and about entrepreneurs. One of the villains of the show is this nefarious billionaire or trillionaire played by Kit Harington. Is that a fair reading of your intentions?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that, because I think Scott and I talked a lot about, when we were making the show, how we wanted to portray technology. And I'll use an analogy, because it's something that we all lived through, which is we had recently a pandemic, you may recall, and technology and scientists were incredibly important, and they made an amazing vaccine, and that is an incredible achievement. We're all sitting here thanks to them. We're very grateful. Scientists and the vaccine could not alone just make sure that that vaccine was distributed in places that lacked refrigeration. The vaccine as a technology could not make sure that it was not weaponized for political partisan end and an anti-vaccine campaign, created to try to influence an election. Those are things beyond the capacity of a technology itself. The technology is amazing, but the world has other things in it. And I think that's what we really wanted to say, was that every technology is deployed by a group of people to a group of people, and the way those people receive it, distribute it, engage with it, politicize it, that is a huge question, and the technology alone is insufficient to address those. One of the big themes in our show is the role of human institutions. We have an episode at the UN, we have an episode in a religious community, we have an episode in the White House, and I think we're asking, are the institutions that we've built as a society capable of responding and capable of using technology and using entrepreneurship, but not being overrun by it? And one of the reasons all those people in the White House are in that situation in that episode is because the government has not been able to act with sufficient speed and clarity to address the problem, so you get a rogue, genius threatening an act of eco-terrorism. That's a failure of civic society, right? So I think Scott and I, we like technology. We love technology. We run around with technology all day. We had fun coming up with the technology in the show. We're not anti-technology. I don't think we're saying that we need to return to a pre-industrial lifestyle and live in a tent to solve climate change. But I also think we're saying that anything, whether it's nuclear fission or a steam engine, can be deployed by good and evil people to good and evil ends.
Scott, do you want to get on that? Yeah.
I have absolutely nothing to add to that. Look, technology, and this is true going back again to an inconvenient truth. We have the solves. Everybody here knows that we can, in fact, solve this problem. The reason why someone would pull me aside and go, yeah, but we're not going to, there are a lot of people making money off it being exactly the way it is. There are a lot of narratives that we've had drilled into our heads that we can't possibly change. They're way too big. And so we continue. And also, there is a real, and Edward talks about it with the monkey brain. We have a really hard time, looking very far into the future. There's a phrase I love, which is prognostic myopia. And we're not great at thinking very far ahead about the consequences of our actions. And we see that not just with climate change, but pretty much in every aspect of our lives. But I don't think for a minute that technology is the problem here. It's just a tool. It can be used however we want.
Yeah, you could use a hammer to build a house or to bash your neighbor's head in. The hammer is just there, and it depends on how you deploy it.
I think the closing line in the show is the problem is never technology, it's ourselves, right? So can I ask, what feelings, what thoughts are you hoping and trying to arouse in the viewer with this show? How do you want people to feel after watching it?
One of the great things about my job is I don't have to answer that question. All joking aside, I think, the artists in our society are here to tell stories, and we're meant to come to them and feel. And so all we really wanted was to tell stories and have people react. So I don't really want to tell you how I hope you feel. What I do want to sort of underscore, however, is that hope alone isn't getting us very far. We've been hoping that this will get better for a very long time. So I think the characters, what we learn from them in our show is those who act, those who lead, those who stand up against people who would have them behave otherwise. So courage, bravery, those are the things I would like to replace hope with. And those are the things I would like people to take out into the world with them. That, and one other thing that we talk about quite a bit, is we got to go to work every day in an environment where we spoke about climate change with grips, with gaffers, with our entire crew. Going to work and talking about this is a huge, huge boon to your psychological well-being, and I believe it's really how the problem starts to get solved. It's when we put this away because we, again, are slaves to a narrative that I really hope people will question. That's when we lose. And so that's more than anything, I think that's what we really want, is for people to start talking about it with their kids, with their coworkers.
Yeah, I think there's not one particular feeling, but I think we do want people to have all of the feelings. There are episodes that are thrillers and they're exciting and you're wondering what's going to happen next. There are episodes where you see attractive people kissing in their underpants. They're all the feelings. They're funny episodes, they're sad episodes, they're all of the feelings, and I think that's what we really want people to understand, is that climate change is something that is occurring, it will continue to occur, and we called the show Extrapolations. We didn't call it, this will definitely happen, there's nothing you can do. It is our guess about a potential future, but we still have the capacity to make different choices. This is a future if we keep muddling along current trends and don't get better. We made the show in 2021, and already in 2022, things happened that were different than the show predicted. So we're already on a different path, and I think our hope is that seeing this type of future gives us the courage to have the conversations that allow us to begin the processes to make other choices, so that by the time we arrive in 2059, people watch the show and go, oh, so off base. Great, that would be fabulous.
Scott, I just want to pick up on one thing. Do you worry that the whole narrative around climate solutions, and I think there's one up right here, bringing climate solutions to life, that there's a risk that becomes a panacea just to make people feel better that something's being done, but actually the real work isn't being done?
It's a really interesting dilemma that I think people face with the solution side of this. If you tell someone something is going to solve the problem, and then it doesn't solve the problem, you, as an expert, have lost something with your audience. And so I think we need to be careful in saying how big a solution is and sort of reframe it, because if we sell it like a panacea, then yeah, it does have a way of backfiring. If we look at it as a constellation of a large constellation of possible solutions, then I think we get closer to what is true and what is meaningful. I know when the Prius came out, I bought one and I was like, solved, did it, done, which is how we felt when we made An Inconvenient Truth. But all we did, was crack a door open. And hopefully this show cracks the door open further. But I have no illusions that there aren't going to be more doors that are going to need to be cracked open. But maybe it makes it easier for the next writers to open the door differently or open a different door. So if we did that, then I feel like we did our job.
We're nearly out of time, but I'd like to close by asking you each to name a book or an article or another show that inspired you, that inspired you and that helped sort of create the show.
I'll go first. So mine is Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si on Care for Our Common Home. It is really great. It's not super long. If you haven't read it, if you are remotely interested in climate change, strong recommend. It's a summary of how we got here and a vision of where we could go that I think is unsparing in its diagnosis of failures and flaws, but also contains a deep and abiding love for all people and all creatures on the earth. And it ends with a really beautiful prayer. And I think it's something that's worth paying attention to.
She gave me that book when we started, so for sure that's a great one. I'll just say, and we don't have time, but check out a book by an Indian author named Amitav Ghosh called The Great Derangement, which really tells you a lot about what the artistic community needs to do to help people really understand the scope of this issue and how we find our way through it.
Scott, Dorothy, thank you so much. Watch it on Apple TV. Well worth a watch. Really recommend it. Now, please, this is our last panel, but please stay seated. Meg Svab is going to come on stage and give us some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us today. This concludes our main stage programming. I just want to thank all of today's great speakers, moderators, and all of you for being such an engaged audience throughout the entire day. This room has been packed, which is amazing. I just also want to thank our presenting sponsors, Mastercard and Zurich, and our participating sponsor, Schneider Electric. And to watch any part of this event after this, if you'd like, you can just go to BloombergLive.com and look for the Bloomberg Green Summit to watch these sessions on demand. So we do have, while I said the main stage programming is done, we do have a couple more breakouts if anybody is interested in participating. We have a climate storytelling workshop, which did require pre-registration because it is a small group, but you can head down there and try. It will be at one of the breakout rooms this way. If you did not register, you can check in and see if there's any space. And then we also have a Greener Living Town Hall, which I'm very excited about. The idea is we just have this great group of speakers who will be on stage, and they will just answer your questions about how you could live a greener life. So that will also be in the breakout room. That one did not, I think we had some pre-registration, but I think you can get into that one if you want, straight down the hall. So those are the two. Just so everybody knows, we do have our networking reception will start at 5 p.m. So if you do not want to join one of the breakouts, just hang out, grab a coffee, grab a snack. You could visit the Mastercard Lounge downstairs, grab a Bloomberg Green magazine, make sure that you read it, and then we will kick off our actual networking reception at 5 p.m. downstairs. Thank you so much for joining us today.